All right, good afternoon. So this is David Raymond, and this is the Virginia Cyber Range Weekly Workshop. And today, I'm going to talk, get into a discussion about cryptography. So I'm going to use some of the Cyber Basics courseware and sort of dive into this introductory material on sort of where cryptography came from and some of the basic terminology. It's really, this week is going to be some pretty basic stuff, but great intro for beginners that don't know anything about cryptography. And there's some good resources that I'll point to that allow students to sort of get interactive and do some hands-on stuff. So today will just be sort of lecture style, and I'll talk about cryptography, and I'll also sort of provide some editorial comments along the way of how to best share this with students. And then in the coming weeks, we'll do some hands-on crypto, so students will be able to get hands-on in the Cyber Basics exercise environment, doing some cryptography exercises. So let me start with overview weekly workshops every Tuesday at 1 p.m. recorded. So these are all posted. I think most action on these comes later when people view the recordings. So welcome for folks who are watching later. These workshops include coverage of the Virginia Cyber Range, certainly not exclusively about the range. So like today, we're going to jump into the courseware repository to grab a set of slides, but we're not going to do any hands-on in the exercise area. Long list of topics that we can talk about during these workshops, and if anybody wants to see a particular topic covered, please suggest it and we'll include it in a future workshop. So I'd like to start, as always, with some recent technology news, really security news. This is one that hopefully folks have heard of. This came out last Friday, so that would have been right the tail end of the last week of September. Facebook breach exposing 50 million user accounts. So, 50 million accounts in Facebook, that's not a huge number, but that's still quite, it's not a huge number for Facebook, right? They probably have, I don't know, 1.5 billion or so users, but certainly a big chunk of people were exposed in this breach. And basically the breach gave people who were able to leverage it, gave people unauthorized access to other people's Facebook accounts. So with unauthorized access, they could do things like, take control of the account, change the login credentials, certainly see the user's feed, change the feed, add things to the feed. And this is the news story. It talks about how it was taking control of. It has to do with a feature that allows users of Facebook to see what their feed looks like from somebody else's perspective, right? So you can look at your feed like you are not yourself, and you can see what's there, so that some sort of chain of vulnerabilities in that process allowed hackers to gain access to the token that allows users to have access to their own Facebook account, and then with that they could do this thing where they could take control of your Facebook account. It's only the only people who were vulnerable were people who had actually used that feature before, and it was probably people who had used it recently because those tokens time out after some period of time. Could depend. That's all configurable. Could be minutes, could be hours, could be days. But so it's probably people who use that feature of Facebook relatively recently that were vulnerable to this. So that's why only about 50 million Facebook users were exposed, rather than all whatever 1.5 billion of them. So that's news story I thought was interesting. And then related to that, this came out I guess a couple of days later, so September 30th, that would have been Sunday. Facebook faces a potential $1.63 billion fine in Europe over this data breach. So, 50 50 million Facebook users were exposed, and of that, there was some percentage of them that were in Europe, and Europe has some new data privacy laws, specifically GDPR, which is a new European law that puts some very strict controls on, or some very strict requirements on data privacy for any online entity that that stores personal data about a citizen of the, or not even a citizen, a resident of a European country. So anybody who's a resident in a European country, whether they're a citizen or not, are covered by this new GDPR law, which is new data privacy law in the EU. And so based on that law, Facebook, they say, is facing this potential $1.63 billion fine. So it's a pretty significant fine for Facebook or anybody else, I would imagine. So, you know, this is the thing about GDPR is it's very it's a law that came into effect a few months ago in May, I think it was, of 2018, and you know, the law itself is still sort of being shaken out by European countries, and you know, it's not clear how well these sorts of fines are going to be imposed. And when this news story says potential $1.63 billion fine, you know, there's this scale. So so they're saying based on the number of accounts that are exposed, that could be the maximum fine. Of course, it could be a lot less than that, and that'll be up to European courts to decide how they're going to treat Facebook. And then there's some amount of Facebook. You know, so a little bit of question on whether the EU can even fine a U.S. company, and that has to do with, you know, whether the company has certain services that physically exist in the EU, which, you know, Facebook probably does. So that may make them you know, subject to laws in the European Union. But lots of court decisions that'll be made before Facebook actually writes a check for $1.63 billion. Another news story I thought was interesting this week was this one about the port of San Diego hit by a cyber attack. So this is not the first port facility that's been hit by a cyber attack. And if you read the story talks about some other port facilities that are hit by cyber attacks, and this particular cyber attack was ransomware. So, you know, it's you know, you might ask yourself, gee, why would somebody try to hack a port facility? You know, people hack banks to get financial data on people, or to change account data, or put money in their account, or they'll hack you know, business organizations to get confidential information about customers of that business, like credit card data and that kind of stuff. You know, why would you hack a port? Well, you know, up until just recently, there really wasn't much financial incentive for doing something like that. But now with the rise of ransomware, so things like ports, you know, entities like ports are becoming targets. And so me and some colleagues gave a talk a couple of years ago at a security conference about the relative insecurity of city level networks, right? So you have cities that have networks that they're not very well secured and potentially vulnerable to attack. And we sort of described what some of the vulnerabilities could be, and why a city might be more vulnerable than say a large company. And at that time, you know, we said that you know, this is the case, but there's really not financial incentive to attack a city network. And when there is a financial incentive, then we anticipate that it might start to happen. And then, lo and behold, about a year ago, maybe less than a year ago, a couple of cities, specifically the city of Atlanta, was there's ransomware attack on the city of Atlanta, a similar ransomware attack on portions of the city network in Baltimore, Maryland. And and the reason there's now this financial incentive is because of ransomware, and you can do things like in a port facility, if you're able to attack the software that schedules, you know, ships being unloaded or parked in on peers, then that is something that a port facility would probably want to pay relatively quickly to get that software up and running again, because every minute that they're not loading or unloading ships, they could be losing millions of dollars, right? So so now a hacker that conducts a ransomware attack on a port might ask for a lot of money. In this case, they asked for something on the order of $350,000 from the Port of San Diego. Turned out that the ransomware attack was not able to, in this case, the ransomware attack was not able to make its way all the way into the systems that controlled the loading and offloading of ships and the parking of ships and scheduling and all that kind of stuff. So, whether or not it was paid, I don't know. But this certainly, if it had made its way into those systems, it's very likely that the Port of San Diego would have just paid the ransom to get their data back. And I think I've mentioned this before on these webinars, but these ransomware operators, they have very good customer service, right? If you pay, they will make sure you get your data back. And the reason they do that is because they want the next person to pay. And if they get a reputation for not, for accepting payment and not recreating the data or making the data available again, then they're not going to get repeat business, right? They're not going to be able to get the next person to pay. So so I think we'll see more of organizations like this getting hit with these ransomware attacks. Hospitals have been a target over the last 1.5 to 2 years. Cities, ports, facilities where the time period during which data is unavailable could lead to serious negative consequences. Like, hospitals, you have patients dying. In a city, you might have traffic signals that are out of operation. You might have 911, emergency response systems that are out of commission. You might have the police, in Atlanta, they had all kinds of problems with the courts and the law enforcement and et cetera, couldn't function properly because of this ransomware attack. So in these sort of organizations, I think, we're likely to see more of this in the future. Excuse me. Okay, so that's my dose of technology news for the day. And again, I talk about technology news at the beginning of just about every class I ever teach, because I think it's useful to bring this sort of, I think it's important to bring home to the students, the fact that this is, real life stuff that affects people's lives on a daily basis. And I try to get very recent technology news. So all these stories are within the last couple of days. And I thought it might be helpful to talk just for a minute about, where I get this security news. So I get a couple of daily feeds, and I've listed a list of news sources on the left. So, these are websites that are primarily security news websites, and most of them have a link on them somewhere where you can get pushed, new stories by email, or a digest, a periodic digest of stories by email. And so that's one of the first thing I do in the morning is I quickly scan, a couple of security news feeds and see what new interesting thing is out there, just to kind of keep an eye on things. And then the ones that I see before I'm going to teach class, I'll just grab a couple of them and throw them on a slide and then discuss them with the class. And they're really good for generating conversation with students about, why would somebody want to attack a port? Why would somebody want to attack a city? When would that be? When might there be financial incentive for that kind of a thing? So it's good for student discussion. Just a quick note on the list of security news sources here. Krebs on security. Brian Krebs is very well known security. He's a reporter and security researcher, writes some really in-depth pieces, and that's a great source of security news. It's not as timely, so it's generally, he'll investigate a story over the course of, days, weeks, months, and then report periodically. So you don't get generally don't get like daily new stuff out of him, but he's got a link that you can get new and interesting stuff emailed to you that I recommend people take a look at. Slashdot is kind of an old school technology news source, but it also includes security news. The Hacker News is a is a compilation of news stories from different sources. The Register is a British news organization, has security news. Their news is always, you know, the headlines are always a little bit tongue-in-cheek, sort of British humor kind of stuff, but it's got some interesting stories. Schneier on security, so the second to the last bullet there, Bruce Schneier is a well-known security researcher, cryptographer, and sort of deep thinker in the area of cybersecurity, and he's got a really good security news feed. And he also pushes out a monthly. He's one of these where you can sign up for a monthly digest of recent news, and it's a pretty good source. And then CNET, security news on the bottom, is another good one. Now on the right side, I list some Twitter feeds, and these are people that I follow on Twitter. And if you're an InfoSec professional or teaching InfoSec, you know, Twitter is you know, if you're going to be on any social network, Twitter is the one to be on. You know, Twitter is sort of you know, I think it's kind of known for like celebrity news or whatever. You know, you hear about what celebrities ate for breakfast and that kind of stuff, but it's also a news source that's followed by InfoSec professionals. So if you follow the right people, then you can filter out all the, you know, stories about Kim Kardashian, and you can get some interesting and timely security news. And so I've listed some feeds that I subscribe to on Twitter. Swift on security is a probably the best one. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek, you know, Taylor Swift themed security news feed, but it's actually maintained by a longtime InfoSec professional, and it's very good Twitter feed. Dmitry Alperovich is the chief technical officer for a company called CrowdStrike. Which, he's another super smart InfoSec professional who has a really good news feed. Paul Asadorian has the Security Weekly feed. He also does podcasts and blog entries, and you know, he's sort of a he is works for a company called Tenable, and Tenable creates software for vulnerability management and vulnerability scanning. So anyway, smart guy, and you know, there's usually some comedy thrown in with his Twitter feed. Richard Baitlick is a retired Air Force officer, wrote a couple of good books on incident handling and security incident monitoring. So his feed is Tau Security. That's a good one. The Gruck is an Australian InfoSec professional. He has sort of this very biting style and has some good, interesting things on his Twitter feed. Mikko Hyppinen is a old school malware researcher, so he talks about new malware and you know, does some analysis of the malware and talks about, you know, who could have created it, where it came from, that kind of stuff. Who else do I need to highlight here? Dan Kaminsky, Brian Krebs, Charlie Miller, second from the last there. Charlie Miller is a kind of newer on this. I don't know, maybe not. He you know, he's not been on the InfoSec scene for as long as some of these other people, but he's sort of made a mark pretty quickly, and he's one of the people who did a pretty high-profile cyber attack a couple years ago on a Jeep. So they were able to gain unauthorized access to a Jeep from, you know, through the internet, and were able to do things like, you know, cause the engine to stop and cause it to drive off the road and all this kind of stuff. And it was one of the first sort of live demos of hacking smart vehicles. Anyway, Twitter feeds that I follow, and if you didn't get a chance to write all these down, I encourage you to go back to the recording and stop it here and take a look at these, add these to your Twitter. Okay, so today I'm going to jump into Cyber Basics, Module 3, Cryptography, and I'm just going to cover Lesson 1, which is Intro and Evolution. So to get started here, I'm going to go to virginiacyberrange.org, go to courseware, Cyber Basics, search. I guess I could have typed in cryptography. Module 3, Cyber Basics Module 3, Cryptography. And I'm going to jump into Introduction and Evolution. First I need to log in, get access to the slides. All right, and here we go. So these are the slides directly out of the Virginia Cyber Range courseware repository. Again, it's in the Cyber Basics course, Module 3. There's 3 or 4 lessons on cryptography, and then there's at least one hands-on exercise on crypto in the Cyber Basics courseware. There are a couple of other crypto hands-on exercises in other courses and modules in the courseware repository. So if you go to the courseware repository and just type in cryptography in the search bar, you'll get a few more results. So here, Intro and Evolution of Crypto. Again, this is a great intro to crypto for students who are not familiar with cryptography. And this is certainly accessible by high school students and even middle school students. And so here are some learning objectives. Understand the evolution of cryptography and cryptographic systems, describe the basic characteristics of crypto systems, apply basic cryptanalysis techniques to decrypt simple ciphers, and then describe what makes the one-time pad impervious to cryptanalysis. Cryptanalysis, yeah. Okay, so this is a quote-unquote encrypted bit of text, right? And it's not super difficult to break. In fact, I use this little message with, so I'm involved at Virginia Tech in a Gen Cyber camp, so a cybersecurity camp for teachers that we hold in the summer. And this is a homework exercise that we give to the teachers to do before they come to the camp. This is something I would say, if you're going to teach this to students, it'd be a good exercise to give this to them the day before, or even give it to them at the beginning of class and say, okay, well, take whatever, 10 minutes and try to decode this message, and then talk about how the students approached it, right? So that's what we do with this at the Gen Cyber Camp, is we have the teachers do it as homework, and then we talk about how you would approach decoding something like this, and the techniques that you would use are similar techniques that people use to decrypt, certainly more sophisticated encoded messages. It's just that you have to certainly take it a lot further when you're trying to break modern cryptographic systems. But if you look at this, I tell the students up front, this is English text, so don't try to decrypt it in French or whatever. And looking at it, you can see some things that give you some really quick hints. So ask the students what things would you look for that might give you a hint. Here you have a single letter, or a J, right? So the J is of course going to be either almost certainly going to be an I or an A. You have an apostrophe here, so this H is most likely going to be a T or an S. You can look, you have some 3-letter words. So 3-letter words are often things like and or the. You have 2-letter words. 2-letter words are not super frequent. Those are often things like if or it. And you can also do you can just look at words themselves and say, well, if this isn't, if this H, it might be an S or a T. Let's see what would make sense. If this was an S and this was an S, how could I make that? And you're probably gonna have a vowel here, or or else this might be an R and a couple of vowels, and you sort of do this and break it down and start. So if the J is an I, what could this be? Well, I don't know a lot of 3-letter words that start with a J, so maybe this is an A, and then this could be and then you just sort of write that in up top, and you go through it, and as more of the letters sort of come out, then you can then you get closer and closer to the solution, and sometimes you're wrong and you have to go back and hack on it a little bit and come back to it. And if you spend long enough time, you're going to get to something like this, right? So here we are. Treat your password like your toothbrush. Don't let anyone else use it, and get a new one every 6 months. And this is a quote by a guy named Cliff Stoll, who's an interesting person. If you have some extra time on your hands, I'd encourage you to Google Clifford Stoll and find out a little bit more about him. He wrote a book called The Cuckoo's Egg, which is a sort of a fan favorite among information security professionals, about his work in the 80s to track down some hackers who were stealing time from computer systems at Berkeley Labs, and he went through this whole process and discovered that it was people paid by the Russian, basically Russian hackers were doing this, and this was like back in the 80s. So that's a pretty cool story. Anyway, so you can get from this to this, and in fact, the story I tell is that my mother used to do these because they were in the newspaper, right? So in the newspaper every morning, at least in our newspaper where I grew up, there was a couple of puzzles. There was a crossword puzzle, and then there was always these crypto quotes. And the crypto quote was just like this, right? It was monoalphabetic substitution, so simply scrambled letters and or single letter replacement. And it was just a puzzle in the newspaper, and my mother did these every day, and she would whip through something like this in 5 minutes probably, just because she had seen these patterns over and over, and she understood how to approach solving these kinds of problems. So it seems a little daunting at first, but it certainly gets easier and easier. So that's an example of very simple crypto, right? So let's dive in here with the lesson after we've done a little hands-on exercise with the students. What is cryptography? Why cryptography? Well, so cryptography can provide all of these primitives in cybersecurity. So cryptography can provide confidentiality. That's the thing we think of the most, right? We take a message, we encrypt it. In order to make that message secret, we transmit it to somebody else. They have some key and some algorithm with which they can decrypt the message, and now I can share secrets over long distances. Crypto can also help provide integrity, and it can provide authentication, and it can provide non-repudiation. So you can use crypto to prove that no one except for one specific sender could have sent a particular message. That's a pretty interesting property. And these things can all be these things can all be achieved through cryptography. And the way they're achieved, we'll talk about in future discussions of cryptography. But for today, we're just going to be focusing on confidentiality, right? So we're just going to focus on this this feature of cryptography, that we can take a message, we can apply some transformations to it to make it secret, and then transmit it to somebody else. And then they can use some inverse transformation to turn it back into a readable message. So let's think of an analogy here, right? So consider two people in different locations. So here we have Alice and Bob. And Alice and Bob want to communicate in secret. And Eve wants to intercept their communication. And so the analogy that we're going to use is a locked box, right? So let's say Alice and Bob want to communicate in secret, and one way they can do that is they can share the combination to a locked box, and both Alice has the combination, Bob has the combination, so they can share messages in this locked box because they each have the combination or the key. But if Eve gets her hand on it, Eve cannot open the box unless Eve can somehow get a hold of the combination, right? If Eve can get the key, then Eve can unlock the box. So that's sort of a basic analogy that you can use for cryptographic systems to talk about with students. One or both two parties are able to unlock the box. Anybody in the middle are not able to unlock it. Similar approach with encrypting a message. So we'll start with some basic terminology. Plain text is the original message that you want to share with somebody. Ciphertext is the coded message. Cipher is an algorithm for transforming plain text into ciphertext. A key is information used in the cipher, and the key has to be shared by the sender and receiver, and it has to be kept secret by the sender and receiver. And we'll see later in later cryptography discussions that is problematic, right? This problem that you have to have a key that's only known by the sender and receiver, and has to be kept secret by them is a challenge in older cryptographic systems, because the question is, how do you share that key with your communication partners without somebody else being able to get a hold of it maliciously? And there are some interesting solutions to that problem. We're not going to cover them today, but they'll be covered in later discussions. So to encipher or to encrypt something is to convert plain text into ciphertext, and then to decipher or decrypt is to recover ciphertext from the recover plain text from ciphertext. I'd have that slide wrong. How about that? Cryptography, the study of encryption principles or methods. Cryptanalysis or code breaking is the study of principles or methods of deciphering ciphertext without knowing the key. So cryptanalysis is trying to break a cipher, right? So that's what we did in that exercise at the first couple of slides, was we applied cryptanalysis techniques to a bit of ciphertext and turn that ciphertext back into plain text. And then cryptology covers the field of both cryptography and cryptanalysis. And the people who do this kind of stuff are people at places like the National Security Agency, right? So they help develop cryptographic systems, but more importantly, they're doing cryptanalysis. They're trying to break other people's crypto systems, and so they sort of have this overarching cryptology mission. So we can characterize crypto systems in a couple of ways. Three independent dimensions we say here. So the type of encryption operations used. So you can do substitution, where you replace one letter with another, just direct replacement. You can do transposition. That's where we shift letters back and forth, and we'll see later some crypto systems where you sort of do you do these multiple rounds of substitution and transposition, and when you apply both substitution and transposition, then you're doing this product sort of operation. So multiple substitutions and transpositions over a message, over separate rounds. Another dimension is the number of keys used. So you can have a single key crypto system where the sender and receiver both share the same key. That's what we normally think of, and we'll take a look at some of those systems in a minute. So there's an encryption key and a decryption key, and those keys are the same value. And then there are some crypto systems where you have two different keys, where you have this notion of a public key and a private key. And again, I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but that's an important advance in crypto systems that allowed that really facilitate the way modern encryption functions. If you think of like the World Wide Web, right? If you're going to have a secure transaction with some external organization, like if you want to transmit your credit card number to Amazon.com in a secure way, then it's going to use a combination of single key and single key encryption, which is referred to as symmetric encryption, and public key encryption, which is this crypto systems where you have a public key and a private key, and that's a crypto method that was developed in the 70s. And was a pretty big advance. And really, if we didn't have public key crypto, sharing those kinds of secrets with websites would be extremely difficult, if not impossible. And so again, we'll talk about that more later on. And then you have another dimension is the way in which plain text is processed, either a block cipher. So with a block cipher, you encrypt a block of text, and then you transmit the block of text. Or a stream cipher where you are encrypting and transmitting at the same time. And those are just two different approaches to, if you think of, sharing data with somebody or sharing messages with somebody, you can either encrypt the whole thing and send them the whole thing, or you can encrypt it as you're sending it. And those are both have their advantages and disadvantages that we'll talk about more. Okay, there's this notion of cryptanalysis. We already mentioned typical objective is to recover the key rather than simply to recover the plain text of a single ciphertext, right? So it's not so much to just turn the ciphertext back into plain text. Really what you want is the key. And with the key, then you can decrypt multiple ciphertext messages and get the plain text out of it. So think of in the days of if you sort of know your history and the history of World War II and the Enigma cipher. There was this desire by the Allies not only to decrypt individual messages, but what they wanted to do was they wanted to be able to get the daily key. That was the whole goal, was to decrypt a single message, and by doing that they would get the key for the day, and then with that key then they could decrypt all the rest of those Enigma messages for that entire day, just very easily without having to do any more of that cryptanalysis. So the goal is generally to get the key, not just to recover the plain text of a single ciphertext message. Two general approaches to cryptanalysis. There's a cryptanalytic attack. So this is where we analyze the crypto system itself to find vulnerabilities, and then based on those vulnerabilities, we use different techniques to sort of tease out the key, and we're able to break crypto systems, not through brute force, but through understanding the crypto system and how it works, and then by sort of reverse engineering and taking advantage of vulnerabilities in those crypto systems. And again, if you know the history of the Enigma system, that was the approach. It was very much a cryptanalytic attack. And then you have the brute force attack, where you basically try every possible combination until you get the correct key, and then you can use that key over and over. Of course, brute force is generally not feasible in modern times, right? The current crypto systems, you'd imagine that the time it would take to try every possible key, it would be way more than you could actually do. And so just to give a sense of that, this is something that you may or may not discuss with your students. But this just gives an example of how long it would take to do a brute force search with different key sizes. And when we talk about key sizes in modern crypto systems, we're talking about the number of bits used to encrypt or decrypt the message. And so, some of the early crypto systems use 32-bit keys. And with 32-bit keys, you have 4.3 times 10 to the 9th possible keys. So it's about 4.3 billion possible keys. And if you're decrypting at 1 decryption per microsecond, it would take 2.5 milliseconds to decrypt a message using a brute force attack on a 32-bit key crypto system. So obviously we don't use 32-bit key crypto systems anymore. But as you increase the number, as you increase the key length, this gets exponential. With each single digit increase in the key length, the time required to decrypt increases exponentially, right? Because we're talking, 2 to the, this is an exponent. When you have 32 bits, that's 2 to the 32, so exponential increase. And so modern crypto systems use at least 168-bit keys in general. So that equals 3.7 times 10 to the 50 number of actual keys. So this is a lot of years, right? 5.9 times 10 to the 30 years to run a brute force search across this key size of 168 bits, and that is again at this at 1 decryption per microsecond. This just a reference value. You can there's probably modern systems that decrypt more quickly on that, but still pretty long time. Okay, so we'll take a look first at classical substitution ciphers, and that's what we saw at the beginning of this slide deck, right? Simply replace one letter with another, and so the most basic of these is the Caesar cipher, and the Caesar cipher is simply a rotation by an agreed upon number, right? In the Caesar cipher, the story is that Caesar, used this to send messages to his generals across the battlefield. It was very quick and easy. You could easily, you quickly take a message, shift it by 3, write it down, give it to a courier. A courier would take it to a general on the other side of the battlefield. If the courier was intercepted or killed or whatever, and the bad guys, the opposing party got the message, they couldn't just read it. They would have to do a little bit of work to read it. Not a lot of work, but enough that maybe the battle's over before they actually figure out how to decrypt it, right? So so here we shift the alphabet. The classic Caesar cipher is a shift by 3 characters, but any sort of a basic shift cipher is often referred to as a Caesar cipher. So in this case, in a Caesar cipher, the key is 3. I mean, if I'm going to shift 3, and if both parties agree that the shift is going to be 3, then it's very simple, right? I rotate the alphabet by 3. I write down my message, and then on the receiver side, I rotate it by 3 the other way. I get out my decrypted message, so I have a shared key crypto system. How do you do a cryptanalysis of a Caesar cipher? Well, here's my brute force approach. And if this is my message across the top here, and I try every possible shift. There are only 26 possible shifts, right? 25 possible shifts. That's pretty small key space. And so, I can simply try every possible shift, and you'll see that if you get down here to where is it? Oh, just shift to 3, right? Meet me after the toga party, right? So this is pretty simple to brute force. Simply try each shift in turn. So this is obviously not a very strong crypto system. You can make it a little bit stronger. Well, okay, so these are cipher wheels. The ones depicted here, right? So like the one on the upper left here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way around to Z, and then the inside wheel has the same letters in the same order. This, you turn it, and this is going to be a basic Caesar cipher, right? It's simply a shift cipher. With something like this more complicated cipher wheel on the bottom, these have wheels with the letters in different orders, and you could do a much more sophisticated crypto system by using any 2 of these, making a Z equal a K, S equal a Y, M equal an M, H equal an H, N equal a P. So now I'm not just shifting the alphabet, I'm scrambling it, right? So I'm replacing a letter with a different letter, and as long as I always replace that letter with the same different letter, now I have a stronger crypto system. Of course, the key is more difficult, right? Now I have to transmit to the receiving end this entire mapping of letters. And you might say here, this is a bit of trivia, but you might say here, okay, well, maybe I wouldn't want to use this combination because I have Z equal K, S equal Y, but then I have M equal M and H equal H, and that's bad, right? I don't want the letter to map to itself. Then somebody could more easily decrypt the message. That's actually not correct. It turns out that one of the fatal flaws of the Enigma system was that a letter could never map to itself in the Enigma system. The Enigma cipher machine that the Germans used during World War II. A letter could never map to itself, and that was one of the critical flaws that the Allies used to break that crypto system, because that's very artificial, and so they knew that, okay, the letter, the letter was never going to be what it showed up to be in the encrypted message, and of course there were more issues than that, but that was one of the critical flaws that led to the breakdown of the Enigma system. Okay, so this is a monoalphabetic cipher. Just jumble the letters arbitrarily. Each plain text letter maps to a different random ciphertext letter. Key is 26 letters long, because you have to be able to map all, each of the 26 letters of the alphabet to its matching letter. What's the total number of possible keys? Okay, with so many keys, this must be secure, right? Is it secure? Well, let's take a look, right? So, so how would you break? So if this is another great discussion to have with students. If you have this monoalphabetic cipher where you're essentially scrambling the alphabet, and you're not shifting, you're replacing letters with random other letters, as long as there's always a one-to-one mapping, and as always you always replace the same ciphertext letter with the same plain text letter. How would you break something like that? And so, you might talk to student, sort of point them towards, well, think of the English language and how often you see certain letters, right? So you certainly see, a T more often than you see a Y or a Z, okay? So you have this redundancy, language redundancy. Human languages are redundant, right? Frequency of use of letters is not equal. In English, E is by far the most common letter, followed by T, R, N, I, O, A, and S. Other letters like Z, J, K, Q, X are fairly rare. So now you can, you can also create, so you can think of the frequency of single letters, and you can also think of this frequency of doubles, digrams and trigrams, and using those kinds of frequency analysis. Really, it's very simple to crack these monoalphabetic ciphers. So here's a frequency analysis of English letters, right? And so again, E is the most widely used, followed by T, then A and O, and etc. And so if you have a long block of text and you do a frequency analysis of the characters in the text, then you map that frequency analysis to something like this, you can get pretty close to the solution right away. And then, you might have to do a little fudging of the numbers to get the exact correct output message, but attacks on these kinds of systems are pretty simple. That's another good exercise too for a programming class, is to give students a monoalphabetic cipher, and then have them write the program to analyze it and turn it back into plain text. Give them a big long monoalphabetic cipher passage. So this whole notion of frequency analysis came about in the 870s, so 9th century, by Al-Kindi. So he did this, analyzed letter frequencies, compare them to standard frequencies in the language used, and discovered that these monoalphabetic ciphers were easy to break. So that was a long time ago that he figured that out. Okay, and this is a tool that you can point your students to, this Khan Academy crypto course, and I assume that folks are familiar with the Khan Academy resources. And in this crypto journey into crypto lesson, it's under the computer science set of modules. You can get the description of the Caesar cipher, and then you can also do this exploration, and you can do a thing where you shift by 3. Whoops. And then you can type in Here's my secret message, and then here down at the bottom you get your scrambled message, and you can change the output by changing the mapping. So that should give students a sense of what this looks like, and you should be able to like copy this out of here, I would imagine. Encrypted message type in. Yeah, so you could give them messages to encrypt and decrypt using this. And then there's this. This is kind of cool. So this might be kind of hard to see. This is a frequency analysis page, and what you see is the grayed out sort of the actual frequency of letters in the U.S. alphabet. And if you start typing, you'll see that you'll see the mapping of what you type to the frequency analysis. And you can't type random stuff. You can't just bang on the keyboard, right? You have to actually type English sentences. But I'll type out some stuff here. I got a piece of paper with some cyber stuff on it, so I'll type. Our mission is to enhance cybersecurity education for students in the Commonwealth of Virginia's high schools and colleges and boost Virginia's cybersecurity. And what you see as you do this is you see these frequencies in a sort of a darker red on the bottom. You see these frequencies growing up this sort of grayed out bar that's already here, and you'll see that it's essentially matches, right? And I was just typing some words from a paragraph on a piece of paper that happened to be sitting on my desk, and it's all English language stuff, right? And I typed about 2 sentences, and if I kept typing, you could expect that these frequencies would just get closer and closer to matching the underlying frequency of letters in the English language. So kind of a neat way to demonstrate this to students. Okay. Word games. This link provides some of these crypto quotes, word game things where you can, it's similar monoalphabetic cipher, and you can hand these out to students and have them hack on it overnight and bring them in and then talk about the path to the solution. Things get more complicated with the polyalphabetic cipher. And so with a polyalphabetic cipher, what you do is you have your plain text message, attack at dawn. Here's my plain text message, attack at dawn. And then my key is the word lemon. And I'm going to say lemon, 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 lemon. And I'm going to take attack at dawn. I'm going to put the key lemon, lemon, lemon over and over. And then instead of shifting by the same number of characters each time, or instead of doing just a direct replacement letter for letter, I shift based on the shift given me by the key letter, right? So L is the 11th letter in the alphabet. So I shift A by 11 characters and I get an L. So T, and then I have E, which is the 4th letter in the alphabet, and I shift the T by 4 letters to get an X. And then the next, here's where you see the strength of this. Here I have another T, and M is the 12th character in the alphabet. So now I shift T by 12 characters and I wrap around Z to A and then back up to F, and now the T becomes an F. So now I have 2 T's in a row, but each of those T's map to a different character. Okay, and then you keep on going, and so now with this polyalphabetic cipher, the key that I have to give to my receiving party on the other side of my communication is the word, right? And in this case, it's lemon. So lemon, lemon, lemon. So if the recipient of the message takes the ciphertext, which is this, and then they take the keyword lemon and they repeat it over and over, and the decryption is the inverse of the encryption, right? So I take the L and I shift, instead of shifting right by 11 through the alphabet, I shift left by 11 and I get an A. I take the X, I shift to the left by 4 and I get a T. Take the F, shift to the left by 12, wraps around from A to Z, then I get the T. So, so you can see from a standard encryption and decryption sort of viewpoint, it's very simple to encrypt and decrypt, but cracking this is more difficult. So this is called a Vigenere cipher. Oops, Vigenere cipher. Simple polyalphabetic substitution. Effectively, multiple Caesar ciphers. Key is multiple. The key is multiple letters long, right? So the lemon is the key in this case. Could be any word. Ith letter specifies the ith alphabet to use. Use each alphabet in turn. Repeat from the start after D letters in the message. Decryption simply works in reverse, right? So how do you crack this? You have multiple ciphertext letters for each plain text. That makes it pretty strong. Hence, letter frequencies are obscured. They're right, so you can't just do that basic frequency analysis. Okay, so then how do you do it? How do you crack something like this? And this, again, this is a good discussion to have with students. How would you approach this? It's certainly more difficult than that simple monoalphabetic cipher. How might you crack this cipher? Well, the key to breaking the Vigenere cipher, the Vigenere, I don't know, I'm not, something like that, big Vigenere, I think it's pronounced French, he's a French guy. Key to breaking the Vigenere cipher is to identify the number of translation alphabets and then attack each separately. So you essentially have to guess the key length. So in this case, the word lemon is 5 characters long. And so if I go back to my example here, each 5th character is rotated the same number of characters. And if I were to, or each 5th letter, yeah, each 5th letter is rotated the same. So essentially what you get is, this is essentially 5 separate monoalphabetic ciphers. And if I were to be able to guess that each 5th character was going to be shifted by the same amount of letters, then I could do a frequency analysis on each 5th character, and it should look like the standard, you know, if this is English text, then it should look like the standard English distribution of characters, and I could easily do this decryption, right? So the challenge is to discover how long the keyword is. So this is a method, the method I just described was developed by a couple of smart guys. One of them is Kasiski, it's called the Kasiski Method, but it was actually developed by him and a guy named Charles Babbage, which if you're a computer scientist, you certainly have heard of Charles Babbage. He invented the analytical engine, what's thought of as one of the very first computers, analog computer, and it was initially programmed by somebody named Ada Lovelace, also famous in the history of computer science. So so Babbage and Kasiski used 2 key insights as they developed this method. First of all, repetitions in ciphertext give clues to the keyword length. So if 2 identical sequences of plaintext letters occur at a distance that is an integer number of keyword length, then they will generate identical ciphertext sequences, right? Like if you have the, and they're the right number of characters apart, then those are always going to encrypt to the same 3 characters. And so through those, you know, you can use that information to get clues to the length of the keywords. And then if the keyword is length n, then the cipher consists of n monoalphabetic substitution ciphers. So then you can just do frequency analysis at an interval of n, and you can get back the original message. So pretty clever approach to this, I think. Works very well. You have to have the longer the message, the better. The longer the encrypted message, the easier it is to decrypt using the Kasiski method. That would be another programming challenge I would give to students. That's a pretty cool thing I would have them try to put together. Okay, so last thing I want to talk about here is this one-time pad, and the one-time pad is how are we looking on time here? Not good. One-time pad is you know, so if you think of the Kasiski method and how that works, if you're able to discover the length of the keyword, and then do take that approach where you do a frequency analysis on every 5th letter, for example, in my simple example where lemon is the keyword. So if you sort of, and you know that a longer message is easier to decrypt, and so if you sort of take this to the extreme and you say, well, if my keyword is longer than my ciphertext, then you can't use the Kasiski method. You can't use any method on it to get the right answer. So a one-time pad is a list of random shifts. This list of random shifts, and the shift sequence must be longer than the message. And if you do that, if you create these one-time pads, one-time pad always has to be longer than the message. This is uncrackable because of two important properties I list here. Number one, shifts will never fall into a pattern because the pad is longer than the message, right? If the pad is shorter than the message, then you're going to get a pattern. If the pad is longer than the message, you can't get a pattern. And number two, the frequency distribution is uniform because the shifts are random. You got to have random shifts. You can't just come up with shifts. They have to be random. They have to be chosen randomly. So frequency distribution is uniform. Shifts will never fall into a pattern. Because of these two properties, the one-time pad is uncrackable, mathematically proven to be uncrackable. And so this just shows that, right? Because the shifts are random and the list is as long as the message, every possible message, so every possible sequence of random letters or a bunch of possible messages are equally likely. Right, and one-time pads are used, right? They were used during, they were used by spies for years. So somebody performing espionage, some spy would go overseas, and they'd have this big, if you read Cold War stories, novels. There's all this spycraft, but these guys would leave with this stack of one-time pads, and as long as you didn't use the one-time pad more than once, you were good to go. You had to use it once. You use it once to encrypt a message, then they would throw throw that specific one-time pad, just a sheet with a random sequence of letters on it. They throw that in the fireplace, so nobody could discover it, and the next message they'd have to use a new sheet off their pad. Okay, so you solved the problem, right? What's the difficulty? Well, lots of practical limitations. You have to make these large quantities of random keys, and then you have to distribute the keys, right? So if you have spies overseas, how do you get those new one-time pads to them? Sometimes they'd have to come all the way back to the United States, and then they'd get the one-time pad, and they'd have to be able to hide it so that if they were searched, it wouldn't be discovered. So certainly some practical limitations, but here's some examples where they were certainly used during World War II and during the Cold War. Unconditional security, so provably secure. All right, and here I just refer to some more Khan Academy resources, cryptography resources. So there's the polyalphabetic exploration, there's the exploration of perfect security, there's the how uniform are you, just lots of good tools. So this is a discussion that you could carry over probably 2 or 3, if you have a I don't know how long are high school classes these days, 50-minute high school class, you could probably carry this discussion over 2 or 3 high school classes and really have some great hands-on with the students and do some good cool in-class exercises. So I'm going to stop there. The rest of these slides talk about, so here's transposition ciphers, row transposition. This is pretty clever, actually. This is just a more complicated sort of a ciphertext system. So you have a key here at the top, and then you have your plain text attack postponed until 2 a.m., and then you throw in some garbage at the end, and then what you transmit is the one column TTNA, then you go to the 2 column APTM, and then you go to 3 column TSLU, and then do it that way, and that makes another good, this is pretty well scrambled. And then you talk to students, how would you approach something like this, right? And then the last of it is this discussion of rotor machines. So this is, these were used during World War II. There were multiple different rotor machines. There was the purple machine used by the Japanese, and then the most famous is the German Enigma, used by the Axis powers during World War II. And these things were pretty complicated, right? So you have this series of rotors, and you have the keypad, and then you have these plug boards. So you basically plug letters into different letters down here, and then you turn the rotors a certain way, and then as you typed your message in here, the letters lit up here on the lamp board, and then somebody would be writing those letters down, and then you would transmit those letters. And of course, both the sender and receiver had to use the same plug board combination, the same rotor combination, but when they typed in that message that came out of the lamp board on the one end, then they got back the correct message, and it would come out on their lamp board, and again, you'd write it down, and there were some issues with the security of these things. Actually, this is a 3-rotor Enigma. Germans later went to a 5-rotor Enigma, which made it more complicated, but the Allies were able to get their hands on one of these, over time, multiple Enigmas, but the first one was taken out of a sunken submarine. It wasn't, so generally the Germans would destroy the Enigma machine if they thought they were going to be captured or something bad was going to happen. But in this case, the submarine sunk, and the rotor machine wasn't, the Enigma machine wasn't destroyed, and the Allies were able to get their hands on it. So interesting story, and they're actually so these things are worth, I don't know, millions of dollars maybe, and there are some out there. There are definitely some in private hands. There are actually several of them at the National Cryptologic Museum, which is located outside the NSA headquarters. That's in Maryland, and they actually have them there that you can you can go type on it and see how it works, and so a pretty cool opportunity to be able to put your hands on this multi-million-dollar piece of gear and use it, and they'll let you can have your kids type out secret messages and stuff on a real German Enigma machine. Okay, that's it for the week. A little bit more than the 1 hour. I'll try to keep it to 1 hour next time. But again, thanks for those who joined in person, and also for those who listen to the recording after the fact. Hope you find this valuable. And if anybody has any particular topic areas they want covered during these weekly sessions, then please send us a message to. You can send me an email or send a message to contact@virginiacyberrange.org. So thanks.